let's take a look at an example of using vectors as parameters for different functions that you want to use. So in this program, we will be using the vector library, and as well we'll do a little bit of randomization. So we need time.h. The randomization will need an srand line, srand time null. And then what we'll have is we'll just have an arbitrary vector here. So vector int, this one will be numbers and with nothing in it initially. Okay, so we're going to begin to break down problems using vectors and functions. So the first thing that we commonly want to do when we have a vector is we want to load it with values. So we're going to load it with a sequence of even numbers. So I'm going to create a function here called evenLoad, and we are going to need to send it our vector numbers and how many values I want to include in that. So we'll load even load with 10 even we'll load numbers with 10 even numbers. So above int main here. Now this is something where we are just loading, so we're going to void even load, and then the way that we declare it here is vector int same thing. We'll put numbers, and then we'll also need this x value for how many numbers we're loading into it. So for this one, for int I equals 2, 2 being the first even number, we'll go while I is less than or equal to x times 2, and then we'll go I becomes I plus 2. So we'll have it counting up by 2s. And then every time we do this, we're going to go numbers dot pushback I. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to want to do is we'll want to display the values that are in it. So we'll have a display, and then this one is really useful. Once you have a couple different methods that you use to display arrays, you can just reuse them in your different programs. So we'll display numbers. We'll do as we've done in some other programs and just separate them by spaces. So void display. Now all we need is a vector int numbers. And similar to what we've done before, we're going to do a for loop here. I just realized that other one is not a traversal for loop. I is 0 while I is less than numbers dot size I plus plus. And then we'll see out numbers I, and then put a space here. And when we're done, we'll put an end out. So let's see what this looks like now. I've deliberately put an error in here, so we'll see what we get as our result. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So there's a problem here in the program. Now, just like any other variable type, vectors, when we create this, numbers here is not numbers from the main program. It's a brand new vector that's created as we begin the function that collects all the values. So the numbers array is being sent by value to the function. And what we want to do is we want to send it by reference so that these changes will affect the primary number. So all we have to do for this one is to send by reference. We just need to put the and sign in here. Okay. So now here's another thing that we can do. Okay, let's just take a look, make sure that works. Run. Okay, there we go. So we've got 2 all the way to 20, the first 10 even numbers. So now let's do something that is a little bit different. So what we could do is return any kind of integer or Boolean or whatever value based on this. But what I want to do is something a little bit more interesting. Instead of even load, I'm going to create another version of this called OddLoad. But what I want it to do in the main program is I want to do this. Numbers becomes OddLoad, and we just want to send it the value of how many we are making. So what I want this to do is to create a new vector with 10 odd numbers, and then the main program is going to store that value into its numbers. So here we're going to do this, and we have to start it not with void, but because it has a return, we have to start it with a type. So vector int is going to be the type OddLoad. So for OddLoad, all we need is the value of x. And then inside, what we're going to do is we're going to have vector int, let's call this one odd nums. And then we're going to use something almost identical to the even load. We're going to start this at 1 instead. And instead of numbers.pushback, I'm going to call this oddnums.pushback. And then when we're done, we are going to return oddnums. So what I want to do is I want to verify that this is working. So I'm going to carry my display down. So now I should get my odd number display. So this is good if you don't like, sending things by reference, because technically maybe this is the better version of it. You only need to send it one parameter, and it just knows what it has to do. So we can get that one down here as well. So now one other thing that is pretty common is imagine you wanted to randomize the values. So what I want to do is I want to make a new one called scramble, and I want it to scramble the numbers, and then let's display them again. So this is a really good thing to use. You use an idea like this for shuffling a deck of cards if the cards are listed as an array. So what we'll do is we'll create this here. Now, in order to do this, I am going to make another function called swap that is going to swap 2 values within the array. So void swap is going to look like this. Vector int, we'll need to send this as a reference, numbers, and we'll have the 2 positions to swap, p1 int p2. Okay, so whenever we're swapping, we need a temporary value because you can't do this simultaneously. So our temporary value is going to become numbers, position 1. Let's put an equal sign here. Then numbers, position 1, is going to get the value of numbers, position 2. And then numbers, position 2, gets the value of temp. There we go. So what that's going to do is it's going to swap those 2 values. So now for scramble, I'm going to keep that one as void as well. So void scramble is going to work like this. We'll have our vector numbers. And then here, we just need to generate the 2 positions, P1 and P2. So what we want to do is we're going to swap positions a whole bunch of times. So we'll start this at 1. Now, how many times we want to swap is dependent on how many values are in the array. So if we have an array with 1,000 values, making 10 swaps will barely randomize it. So here's my rule of thumb. We're going to be basing how many times we do this based on the size of the array times 10. So in our vector array of size 20, it's going to make 200 swaps. So that should definitely randomize it pretty effectively. So what we have to do is we have to set what position 1 is equal to. And thankfully, the random function that we've been using lends itself really nicely to this. We're going to be doing a modulus numbers dot size. So whenever this happens, the minimum that we're going to get out of this result is going to be 0, and the maximum is going to be numbers dot size minus 1, which is perfect because, again, with an array of size 10, the last position is actually 9. So this is really helpful. So I'm just going to do this. We'll do the same thing for position 2. And then we'll run our swap. So not swamp, swap numbers P1, P2. So it's going to send the vector and then the 2 positions to be swapped. So let's take a look at how this works. So we get our even one, our odd one, and then the scrambled odd number. So this is useful for a ton of instances where you have a set of values that you want to mix up.